convincing you to read books I loved based on their first lines. Let's start with the end of the world, why don't we? Get it over with and move on to more interesting things. On the day I die, my husband ties a red cloth on our gate. Do not enter the eternal staircase after 8 p.m. Yadriel wasn't technically trespassing because he'd lived in the cemetery his whole life. There shouldn't be any monsters left in Lucille. If nightmares had music, they'd sound like the storm. They burned down the market on the day Vivek Oji died. As soon as I saw the light off the side of the highway, I found myself falling in love with it. When red wins, she stands alone. Would you read these books based on their first lines? Theodore Wyatt's greatest regret in life was dying while wearing a cat costume. When the multiverse was confirmed, the spiritual and scientific communities both counted it as evidence of their validity. The scientists said, look, we told you there were parallel universes. And the spiritual said, see, we've always known there was more than one life. You never forget the first time you see a dead body. You ever seen a clan march? Her son dies in a child-sized bed, big enough for him but barely enough to hold her and her husband who cling to the edges, folding themselves small so they fit one on each side of him. All mothers have one thing in common: pain. The most important lesson I've learned since I turned 16. Love can't be contained in a word, a kiss, a single heart. The Spark Circus rolled into town on a Tuesday, early in the morning. Convincing you to read books I love based on their first lines. I live in the cube. I write on its glossy gray cinder block walls however I can, with my nails before, with pencils now that the guards bring me some supplies. Convincing you to read books based on their first lines. At least the doctors had the decency to kill me before they opened me up. Convincing you to read books I loved based on their first lines. Late one evening, toward the end of March, a teenager picked up a double-barreled shotgun, walked into the forest, put the gun to someone else's forehead, and pulled the trigger. This is the story of how we got there. Convincing you to read books I loved based on their first lines. They're like worms. Convincing you to read books I loved based on their first lines. I am a frozen statue of a girl in the woods. Only my eyes move, darting from the gun to their startled expression. Convincing you to read books based on their first lines. You warned me that knowing your secret would destroy us. At first, it sat in our marriage like a blue-lipped ghost, hardly noticeable until a trick of the light drew it into focus. But you could always tell the days when it gnawed at my thoughts. You tried to comfort me. You stroked my face and curled my fingers to your heart. You said, if you pry, you'll destroy our marriage. But oh, my love, you lied. Convincing you to read books I loved based on their first lines. My name is Eliza Bowens, and I am a murderer. Convincing you to read books based on their first lines. Nicole often wondered what had happened to the body. A few months after she arrived in Lagos, a body appeared in the lagoon close to the compound, bobbing along in a blanket of trash, a bloated starfish face down in the water. The barrel-shaped torso and splayed limbs, blackened where the skin was exposed, greenish-yellow where submerged, suggested it was a man. Convincing you to read books I loved based on their first lines. I shouldn't have been surprised that fairies exist. Convincing you to read books based on their first lines. Tomorrow night I will die, and yet my hands remain as still as stone. Convincing you to read books based on their first lines. There were many things Asuka did not consider when she agreed to travel from one sun to another. Convincing you to read books based on their first lines. On the night the fairy world collides with ours, anything can happen and wishes come true. And right now, I'm wishing I'd stayed home.